So I want to preface this session with 2 years ago, category creation. Rhonda Schatz gave an amazing presentation. Everyone was enthralled. It was so good. So then we brought it back and we did a panel. And I think some of the folks you're about to meet were on that panel. Again, absolutely amazing. And one of the consistent themes was the book Play Bigger. Who's read it? Put it in the chat. I'm sure most of us have read it or heard of it. And so we decided to, and this was a big decision, but we decided to let a gentleman join us for just a little bit of our empowered retreat, because he is a lot of the concepts and, one of the authors of Play Bigger. So I am now going to turn it over to Janice Lee, and she can introduce the full panel and kick this topic off. Let's talk category creation. Let's bring up.
All right. Hi, everyone. So apparently category creation has become a thing in the last few years. So we thought we'd kick off this session by talking about a couple of category creation exercises that we've just each have gone through. So I'll start with myself. Right now, I am the Chief Market and Product Officer for a Series C startup in the Valley called HelpShift. What HelpShift does is we power the in-app help experience inside the world's top mobile games and mobile apps. So anytime you run into an issue when you're using these games and apps, HelpShift technology is what you interact with to get your problem resolved. So I'll talk about the category that we created for the company, but creating the category for my role is also interesting because I spent the first half of my career in product, actually. So running products, taking products to market, building products, even running engineering. And then I spent the second half of my career in marketing. And from my product point of view, I typically would look at marketing and say, why don't they understand the market enough? Why don't they understand the product enough? Why don't they understand the technology enough? And then when I got to the marketing side, I said, why doesn't product understand the market enough? And why doesn't product understand the customer enough? And so now I get to connect those two bridges together, because to me, they are two sides of the same coin. So I get to enjoy the unique role of doing both for HelpShift.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. It's JJ again. And by the way, my name is Jennifer Johnson, but everyone calls me JJ. So please, 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 I am JJ. And I am the Chief Strategy and Market Officer at Amplitude. So Janice and I share in common that we both have not only category designed as CMOs, but we are category designing our own personal and professional brands. And it was actually at a Play Bigger event last year. Actually, I'm going to take it even a step further back. It was at this event last year where there was a very insightful conversation on the role of the CMO. And it got me really inspired that I believe that the CMO role is at an inflection point. And there are CMOs that are demand gen and revenue and growth focused, and you need all of that. That is not important, but that companies, and we're here today to talk about that, and that's a theme of today, is that the CEO and the board want market designers and category designers and category creators, and that is not a marketing function. It is a business and a strategy function. And so I had an amazing run at Tenable, which I talked about earlier during the IPO session. And I got another amazing opportunity to join a company called Amplitude. And not just to run marketing, but to run the entire ecosystem and all the partnerships and customer experience and corporate strategy. And hopefully take this company on a path where there is no digital business on the planet that wouldn't run their business on Amplitude. So that's all I'm going to say, because I'm in the weeds in the category journey right now. But I wanted to introduce the person of the hour, the man of the hour, because my first CMO role was given to me by my great, wonderful, dear friend, Mr. Peterson, who gave me the reins at Coverity when he left to start Play Bigger and write the book. So without further ado, Dave, intro to you.
Hey, thanks, JJ. And I have to call you JJ. There's a longer story over tequila that I didn't, when Jennifer Johnson came to interview for that job, I didn't know it was JJ. And so when she walked into the lobby, I was like, oh, you don't have to interview. Let's go grab a beer. Yeah, you got the job. So great to be here. Let's just say when Latney and the crew said, hey, we want you to come and speak at this very exclusive crew. It was a daunting ask and a daunting quick yes, but I understand that there's some precedent being set here. And so I show up not to share what I know, but share what I've learned. And it's pretty amazing. The ride from the first, the 20 years of arm waving that me and my partners at Play Bigger did to try to explain to the world that category mattered, to the day we decided to write the book, to the day that we found out that it was actually helpful, and to this day where it's now becoming, the discipline and part of the charter of the CEOs and CMOs. And there's so many things. I've learned more in the last 4 years than I've learned in the last 25 years about category design. Hope we can drop some great stuff into the conversation. And like I said, 300 lightning strikes later, 53 categories later, I stand here. I guess what I'd say is I promised Latney that I would meet this moment, so I'll do my best. And let's get the conversation started.
All right. So to get us started, if we think about what we talked about last year, I feel like we really dove into a bunch of different areas, and this question of category creation is very dense. So we're going to try to unpack it by asking the 5 simple questions. What is it? Why should you care about it? Who owns it? When should you do it? And how do you do it? So before we dive into answering the first question, which is what is category creation, let's talk about what a category is. So I pulled up the official definition of category, and this is what Webster's dictionary thinks category is: any of several fundamental and distinct classes to which entities or concepts belong, or a division within a system of classification. And I think the point here is it's about relativity, right? So a category isn't about you, it's about you within a context of others. And JJ and Dave and I have been, we spent the last few days talking about this, but we jumped right into category creation and we didn't pause on the word category. So if you look at the official definition of category, JJ and Dave, is there a difference in the practical definition of category?
I'll jump in because we're in this conversation all day. And, the second part, a division within a system of classification, it couldn't be any more true. There's a couple of category truths, and it's nothing that Play Bigger invented. It's just how the human mind works. Every consumer on the planet, every business buyer goes through a sequence. They go from a problem to a category, and a category to either a company or a product every single time. And so the classification system stuck in everybody's head is, when you go to the grocery store, you look for the organic section, that's a category, right? And you go to the category first, and that's where you find your products. And don't get me started about who owns that classification system. It was owned by Gartner, Forrester, IDC, Lumascapes, Bubble Charts. It doesn't belong there. It belongs to all of you. And so that we can unpack some of that, but it is a gate. And once you understand the gates there, you can do some pretty amazing things for your company to get kind of front and center in front of that category, because people will walk through that gate every time.
Awesome. Okay, so let's address the first question of what is category creation then? And we're going to talk through the different ways to think about this. Let's first think about what it means, what creation means. Is it really creation?
I think this is this was a great topic that we had in our discussion the other day that I hadn't even thought about it, I think, and put it into words. That is that everybody thinks that to be a category designer, you have to be a category creator. And by that meaning, you have created something that people can see. It's visceral. You Google it, your term is there, it's up in Google, you have a magic quadrant, you have press releases, every competitor on the planet is using your term. Yes, all those things are great, but category creation is actually not about that. That is the byproduct of when you actually do what is the real truth here, which is category design. And I want both of you to share your experiences on this, but I always talk about the fact that, you know, there's a science to this, and you can read Play Bigger and get the playbook. There's an art, and the art is really what this is about, because it's about getting the entire company and the entire executive team and every single one of you who sat in the seat, whether you were doing category design or not, know exactly what I mean, is when you have 5 different people with 5 different very strong opinions at the table. And how do you rally every single person in that room and then across that company aligned on a singular vision and a singular message? That does not happen very often. And when it happens, it's magic. That is what category design actually is at the end of the day. And I'd love for, you know, Dave and Janice, for you to share your inputs on that too.
Janice, jump in.
Well, maybe what I'll do is share something interesting that I heard from you the other day, Dave, is the word decision. And I think that's an important distinction, because we think of category design as an action. It's actually a decision. And when I first heard this term, category creation or design, which actually wasn't that long ago, and I'd actually in the chat, I would love to know from everybody in the audience, how many years ago did you hear of this concept, category design or category creation? Because I actually never looked at it that way. I looked at it as, I'm building products for which there is a market that has an unmet need, a market that has a problem. So how do you describe that unmet need? That becomes sort of the category. What your role is in that category is your position. And so I actually never looked at it as an exercise of category design or category creation. I looked at it as taking products to market and building the right products for the right audiences within that market. That's what I think category design is.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny, because in my previous company, I even got in the habit of saying, well, yeah, but for the category, we need to do that. And my CEO very wisely stopped me and said, no, we don't need to do it for the category. We need to do it for the business. It's good business hygiene. And I think that's like one of the biggest things is people think about, well, how do you know the category is working? Well, yeah, you have all these other signs, but those are branding signs, right? You know the category is working when you are delivering marketing leading products, when you are growing your business, when you are increasing your average deal size, when you are getting those C-level meetings, when you are depositioning your competition. That category design is a lever to go do all that. And I think that's like one of the biggest learnings that as a category designer that I learned is, don't measure yourself based on category metrics, but measure your category based on business metrics.
Yeah, and I think you're both touching on it, and I don't have a way to prove this, but I just know it from the work we do and all the great work that we see. Category design is a decision. It's to take something that's always going to be there, because I don't care. I'll argue this until the sun sets. The day you start your company or the day you start introducing your product to the market, you will be in a category. And then you have a choice to make. Do you control the category? Do you define the category? Or do you let somebody else control and define it? Do you let somebody else tell you what category you're in? Or do you tell them what category you're in? But that's what people see on the outside. 80% of category design happens inside. It's the stuff nobody sees. If you hung around Kyle and Lundina and the Qualtrics team, they made XM look like a straight line. And no offense to our Medallia fans and the sponsors here, so did they, right? It looked easy. It wasn't. There's a long and winding road. And we just are launching a new category with a great company. If you haven't heard about it, it's a company in a category. The company is Solonis. The category is Execution Management System. And we talk about it all the time. If you can get the engineers to write code to solve the category problem, the category is real. The day the sales teams sell the category in their sales deck and the customer says, I'll have some of that, the category is real. The SOW, the legal terms, the delivery, the UI, that's where the category is real. And then everything else, from the website to the press coverage to, God help you, the Gartner analysts, that's all the long tail. And so if you can make it real inside the company, it's almost unstoppable.
Yeah.
And we could get in a little bit of discussion about why it shouldn't just sit on the CMO's shoulder too, because that's where it kind of can start end to end if you're not careful, but it's all inside. And if you can get it right inside, the outside's the second act.
David just made me think of something, and there was a question that came in the chat of, do you need competitors to be in a category? And I think this conversation is exactly why, this is exactly making the point. Because I remember so distinctly when I was at Andreessen Horowitz, we had the head of Gartner research come in and he put up this slide, and it was all about how to work with Gartner. And he put up this slide and it said, why your category isn't. And that made it like the light bulb went on for me. Analysts serve a purpose, but they're not doing this. They're not in a company helping executives and a company make decisions. They're tracking markets that already exist. And by definition, in the analyst world, a market has an established agenda. It has established competitors in it, multiple competitors. There's usually a leader already. It's a rear view mirror looking picture. It doesn't mean it's not important, but I think that's a really important point here, is to say, if you're a category of one, it still means you're building a category because you're leading it and you're driving your company and the market to a set of decisions that others will follow.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important for us to know the distinction that there are types of categories, right? And what Gartner studies are categories that have already been created or designed by somebody else by the time Gartner figures it out.
Right.
But there are other types of categories, and Dave, you articulated what those three are.
As far as like the, are we talking about like the continuum of kind of when category design starts?
Yeah, there's the category that previously existed because somebody else created it, right?
Yeah. We sort of call it, so there's like so if you walk through this sort of problem category fit, does the problem I solve fit my category? If the short answer is yes, you're in the right category. And the second type of option decision you can have is you can modify or frame your category, right? Smartphone from phone. That's been done, and it's a perfectly acceptable approach. And then if you're standing here staring at a problem and looking at your products and the world has no idea what you're asking them to do, why would I hop in a car with a stranger? That's what Lyft asked us to do. You wouldn't do that. If there was, if that was their product brochure, you'd say, no, I'd rather not ride in a used Prius with a college student and a pink mustache on the front cover, on the front bumper. I wouldn't do it. It goes against my morals and my integrity and what my parents taught me. But the category problem needed a category to make it okay to hop in a car with a stranger, and that was ride sharing. Or spend the night in somebody's house, which is weird too, right? That's, the whole short-term rental category made it okay. And somebody else's shampoo and soap, it's gross. So all that said is there's a number of different ways to think about that. But, the other conversation we were having, and it touches on so many of the conversations earlier today. And by the way, just for everybody who's hosting this event, it's the best business event I've been to in the last 15 years. Period, end of sentence. The conversation here is real, it's authentic, it's helpful. You can walk home with something. And if in this category discussion, whether it be the great IPO from Snowflake or some of the other discussion, it's super relevant, because if you're in a Series A, you're going to be asked by one of your VCs or your board members or somebody to think about category design and how and when do you incorporate that for market entry. And then if you're sitting in a Series B company, Series C, and you just landed a $75 million round of financing, I guarantee somebody's going to ask you, all right, how are we going to incorporate this into the category? And then pre-IPO, we just talked about that. S1 galore. JJ wrote a category S1 at Tenable. Our friend Naomi Allen wrote one at Livongo for applied health signals. It was a clinic that they put on at Snowflake. the S1, the perspective, is a category overview now. It's so different than it used to be. And all of these conditions are going to be in the continuum of your career, right? And so we got to get ready for this stuff, right? Because, and we want to lead these initiatives and not, sort of be led.
Dave and Janice, what do you think about, timing, right? Dave kind of just touched upon this, that, I get asked this question, Dave, I'm sure you get asked this question 1,000 times more than I do. When is it the right time to do it? And I think it sounds like we're coming to the conclusion that there are multiple right times to do this, right? And I think it's really important to understand when those right times are. And a lot of us are in later stage, maybe public companies already, that I think there's a really important question of like, that's the one time. It's like every other time could be event driven, right? So when you're entering a market, you have to enter it the right way. You probably have some moment in time where you know why you're being hired, because growth is stalled and the company needs to supersize itself. There's an IPO, there's an event where you need a narrative. All those things I think are tailwinds pushing it. But how do you know? How do you know across all those things when it's the right time? And then after you're public, does that mean you just stop? That's like the $1 million question, is what happens after you're public and you come up with this big narrative?
Well, and I want to circle back to Janice here too, but we were in I say this like learnings for all of us, right? So, and my partner Al and I were invited to go speak with the entire banking board at Morgan Stanley, everybody behind an IPO, 61 bankers and the lead tech analyst there, and behind this whole surge of IPOs. 2020 was a lousy year, but it's not bad for IPOs. And so the discussions were exactly this. How do you create a framework for the public to understand what to get excited about? They'll see your growth, they'll see your profitability, they'll see your numbers, but why are they excited? Your story, the hope, what's next? And then if you're a publicly traded company, sort of apex in the current category, next act. What is the next act? These are the conversations that I don't think you can control it with a new brand, a new positioning, a new anything. I think the container that they're looking at, that you're in, the performance of your category is what they're looking at. And that's where the rewards to the public market comes. And you see next acts all the time, earlier stage too. Series B, how many tech tools and instruments hit that critical mass? They raise a big round, and now you're asked to sell that same tech tool to a CEO that's never heard of you, or would ask you, or, you couldn't even have a conversation with them. So sometimes the next act is moving from the technology, let's call it foundation that you build, right? You guys did this at Tenable, you had Nessus. And then you converted that into a conversation with the C-level through cyber exposure. That's a next act too. And you could continue to be an open source tool, or you could be a business platform, and that's what you guys did. And that was a clinic too. And so this next act lives inside of private companies, and then you see it all the time on the long tail. For the companies that are already public.
Yeah, this really resonates with me because in my current experience, why I'm at HelpShift. HelpShift is pre-IPO, Series C, so kind of mid-stage. And I think I could argue that it's almost a second act as well. And I could also argue that it's entering a market, all three of those at the same time. And I don't think this is unique, because there are a lot of startups out there. More often than not, startups build a product because the founder CEO has a vision, has a purpose. And it's driven by some innovation that maybe isn't evidenced by a market yet. And so you find yourself in a market where it's super easy to capture the first 10 million, super easy. Any market is big enough for you to capture your first 10 million. If you've got a product that's halfway decent, it's getting to the $50 million mark that really tests you. And I think a lot of startups who get that first 10 million starts to realize that they may not be in the market where they're set up to win. And that has a lot to do with a market that's already been defined and owned by others. So I would say in our case, HelpShift designed products for mobile app companies to create an in-app help experience for mobile users, very different users who don't want to pick up the phone, don't want to do email. Email is non-existent. Yet HelpShift found itself trying to compete in customer service. So customer service is an industry that's been around for I don't know how many decades, maybe even a century, before IP telephony came along. And HelpShift found itself trying to compete with the big boys, the old boys, like the Genesises, like old school contact center, and even Salesforce. But the product wasn't designed for their end users. The end users of that Genesis targets, those brands, they're okay picking up the phone. They're okay sending email, except in fact, they prefer it. So what HelpShift realized was we had a good product, but it was pointed at the wrong market. And so we had to return to our roots and say to ourselves, for which market did we build our product? And let's remember who they are. And so how do we define that market? Because it wasn't defined. In fact, it's not defined today. And I struggle to even get market research data to help me size the market. Imagine sizing the market of every single mobile app company in the world. What research firm looks at every single mobile app company in the world? And then intersect that with customer service for every mobile app company in the world, right? So that market doesn't exist, and that's okay because it creates an opportunity for us. So the way we think about ourselves is we are the only mobile-first customer service platform for B2C brands. And it may not sound like a big market because it's not being studied, but it's certainly big enough for us to go after our D series and then our E series and to go public. So for us, it was kind of a second act, and it was an existential crisis that caused us to say, we're not growing as fast as we think because we're competing against the wrong competitors. And we need to think about where we started.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I always think of as we're talking through this, second act really is integrated into all these things. I mean, the Tenable story, and I always tell people, and Dave, you've mentioned this concept of category product fit, which I love because it's obviously a play on product market fit, but people ask, well, how far does the category need to be ahead of the product? And is it okay if the product's ahead of the category? And, for at least in Tenable's case, we had this amazing product. Dave mentioned it, called Nessus, which is a vulnerability scanner in cybersecurity that had this amazing community around it, right? It's a $2,500 scanner that you can swipe with your credit card. So how do you become an enterprise company and platform on that, right? And so the category it seemed so far of a reach from people knew us as a scanner to all of a sudden start talking about cyber risk at the board level. It was like, whoa, that's light years away. But what it did, right? What it did is it created a container for us to go and say, okay, well, we're going to go up level our positioning and go build new product. And it actually created a framework for how we built new product. And we brought out a product called Lumen, which was all about taking that scanning data and translating it to the business. And so a CISO could actually go into a board meeting and say, we need to invest $1 million there because that's where our riskiest cloud platform is. That's transcending the conversation, right? And so what I'd say is the category was ahead of the product in that respect. It also created a framework for M&A. We acquired an industrial control system security technology company, right? Because based on our framework, that was part of our vision, right? Then something interesting happened where the product and the category kind of caught up, right? And so the category had been ahead of the product for so long, and then all of a sudden they started to come together, which is what you want, because if you have a category that's hanging out there and there's no product coming, that's what we talk about when you read the book, The Triangle. You have a category that's hanging out there with no product coming along, that category is going to become a marketing message really quickly, right? So what you want is that category to help usher the product. And if you're even luckier, I actually think it would be a gift to even have it the other way, where you have a product that's advanced, that the category actually gives the product its day in the sun, right? I mean, I actually don't think that's wrong either. So I think but when those 2 points come together, it's like that's the magic, but I also think that's maybe a signal of your second act. I mean, Dave, you talk to companies all day long about this. What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I could speak recently. Just if you look at what Celonis just did, and if you think about the triangle, remember product, company, category. And any one of these three things can be ahead of each other, right? You could hire ahead of your ability to deliver. You could have a product that you need to catch the people up to. And a lot of times the category is either ahead of the product or behind it. If your category is behind the product, you got the world's greatest category problem, because you get to demonstrate what it really is capable of, right? And start to change the dialogue to the problem. And I talk a lot about, you want to become a problem marketer. Problems have absolutely no boundary conditions, and they create pain, and they create fear, and they create gain, and they create love. And if you can get out there and touch the heart with a problem, they'll listen. People listen irrationally to problems. And then if you have a product that's not getting its day in the sun, it's like 1/10 of its value is being consumed. That's dying for a category and a problem that aligns with the true value of the product. If you look at what Celonis just did, if you spent any time with them, if ever, one day you'll probably see one of their demos. They were world famous. They conquered the champions of this category called process mining. And they just unveiled this category called an execution management system. I won't bore you for what it does, but it basically digs in and untraps and unlocks all this capacity you have stuck inside of all these massive systems that you run your business on. And if you see one demo, nobody even shakes their head. They're like, no kidding, you're an execution management system. And in fact, their customers, their analysts, their partners said, for the last 5 years, we've been telling you, you've been solving a bigger problem. So if any of the CMOs on this call here, you've been solving a bigger problem, or you get that look back and say, why don't you start to extend out and expand the problem scope? That's a good indicator that your problem's ahead of the category that you're in, as well as maybe even the company and how it's designed, the type of sales structure you have, the sophistication and experience of your executive team, you name it. But this alignment stuff is critical, and we're going to get into this in a second. But the other secret sauce is all about alignment, moving these things together. And there's nobody that can do that other than, actually at the end of the day, it's going to be the CEO that puts this initiative on the table. And then you, as the chief market officers in the room, have the right to stand up and be the advocate and the partner with the CEO to drive these initiatives. And this stuff it's unfair when you get it right. It's absolutely unfair to the competitors who are trying to push features up the hill, match you in a proof of concept to try to drive price down. All this stuff is old school. It's as old school as, I was reading the book up here, right? It's like old school. We're moving into the new school. And if you want to take a account-based selling and you're going to go target logos and you're going to have a conversation, you got to bring a category to the conversation, right? Because they expect a business conversation, and it's going to really, really help you kind of fill those gaps and things like that. And now I'm just kind of waving my hands a little bit, but this is so fundamental. And there's a lot of work you can do to kind of figure out where is our product, where's our company capabilities, and where's the category fit in context to both of those two things.
Yeah, I think that's an important point that you made, and I'm watching the chat in the window as well, because what everybody's hearing and hopefully picking up on is that the category creation or design job is actually, it's a business decision. And it's rightful that the CEO owns it, because ultimately they're responsible for the entire business, and it's not just a marketing exercise. And if the CEO is not bought in, it becomes extremely hard for a marketer to drive the change that's needed. In my own example, to your point earlier, Dave, when you said, how do you know you achieved a category, right? And hopefully everybody heard the answer. It is not when an MQ is created. It is when the first lines of code are written with that category defined by the customer problem. When the first line of code is written to solve for that problem. And what I saw happen at HelpShift when we said, here's the market that we need to be serving with a product that actually already has product market fit, mobile gaming, mobile apps. the minute we decided that and got that point of clarity, the entire roadmap shifted. And of course, I own the roadmap, so I get to shift it. But, but the point was sales and development and design, once they had that moment of clarity, just the acceleration that happened at the company, like I'd never seen it before. And it's so important for the CEO to own that, because even if you have marketing aligned and your product leader aligned and your sales leader aligned, if the message doesn't come from the CEO is the person who drives the culture of the company. The CEO is the person that everybody believes in. And if the CEO doesn't believe, other people will not believe.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
So when I joined Tenable, Amit Uran, who's the CEO of Tenable, who's a wonderful human being, he bought books. He bought the Play Bigger book for every single person on the extended leadership team. And he made everybody read it, even before I got there. It was awesome. I walked into my office on day one and there were like 50 Play Bigger books that people were taking. It was great. Like but that's what I'm saying. That's what you need. And when we talk about it not being a marketing driven exercise, I made the leap from being a marketing executive to a business executive when I really understood how to design a category, because you take it out of the realm of marketing and you put it in the realm of the business.
Yep.
And it becomes your strategy. And by default, then the CMO to me, the CMO is the quarterback that helps the team drive to those decisions. But the CEO needs to be the one standing up and owning it. There's
Yeah.
no question about that.
Hey, one last thing, and I know we got to get to Q&A. If you asked me now, not 5 years ago, but right now, what the job is of the chief market officer or the CMO when it comes to category, right? They got a lot of other stuff to do. I would say alignment. And I remember back in the day when I was back at Mercury Interactive, working 85 hours a week, just with my only real job at the time, right? And when I realized, and I was put on a few initiatives, including our category initiative, it became a cross-functional dialogue. You get to sit in between products and engineering and sales and enablement and partnerships and biz dev and M&A and finance and investor relations and comms. You're in the middle. In the hub of what you're creating informs all those spokes. And there's very few functions in the organization that has that kind of control point. And so we always talk about, and JJ and I spend all kinds of like therapy sessions talking about what's the CMO's role when it comes to category design. And we landed on the CMO's role is to keep the CEO in place as the chief category designer. And then keep the cross-functional initiatives prioritized so you always see category progress in the product agenda, the engineering agenda, the sales agenda, the business development agenda, the discussions on when you're writing your quarterly script for earnings, it's mentioned. And if you can keep that going and you become the advocate that keeps the cross-functional initiative running, that's one of the jobs. You got a million other ones, but from a category design perspective, that's where you want the cadence to be. And if the flip side of that, if you're the only person talking about the category in the company, and this is the CMO carousel, right? I've been on it. The reason JJ was the CMO after me is I got my brain splattered all over the wall. Is the day they get sick of the category is the day they get sick of you, right? And what you want is to share the love. And you want the CEO to become the chief category officer, and you're the market officer. You're going to make it happen. And he or she's going to lead the industry forward and help direct the company to the right set of priorities.
Dave, I want to just repeat and pause on that. If you try to be the hero of the category as the CMO, the moment the company gets sick of the category is the moment they get sick of you as the CMO, period.
Speaking from experience.
We always learn from those scars, don't we?
Oh, where's my tequila?
Oh, we'll get you some. Your candle looks good, though. I
have
that.
a nice candle. I have my book.
I know. You're in good shape, Dave.
I'm going to cover up this book. I'll just put yours right there. How about
No.
that? Oh, yeah.
They're both great books. So some questions for our experts here. Category failures.
Ooh.
Some
They're
good
so funny.
examples of just total flops.
Let me actually have an interesting twist on that question. It's almost a partial example of an answer, but it's also a question. So early in my career, I was lucky enough to help start a new business and create a category, take the business from zero, build the products, acquire some technology along the way, grow it to $100 million, create the category, became number one in a category. Now it was small, it was like $500 million market, super small at the time. This was pre-iPhone. And then the category got eaten by the iPhone. So the category actually went away. The business died eventually. I had left it. But would you consider that to be a failure? So if a category dies, is that a failure?
I think that you have to evolve your category, right? If you see it.
Yeah, that's it.
I think that there's lots of examples of big companies that had a heyday and didn't see when I think of category failures, I think of, PeopleSoft and Workday or Siebel, and where they just were too late and someone came in and created something else. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah. Could I throw a little more on this one? So, and this is the tricky part, right? And if you kind of look in the book, there's a CRM research that we did about these category curves. It's critical because you have to pay attention to where you're at and in what curve you're on, because Salesforce automation was not a failed category. It was owned by Brock Systems. It was owned by Siebel Systems. And now it's owned by Mark Benioff. Category is thriving. There's not a revenue system on the planet that doesn't have an SFA category in a system inside of it. It's just how it's delivered. First one to automate it was Brock. First one to scale it was Siebel Systems, and then it didn't work so well on prem, right? So we moved it into the cloud, and that story is writing itself. And by the way, we spoke to probably 100 of these new kind of mobile CRM systems, and no offense to the absolute pioneers here, but they're so young they don't even know what CRM is, right? And so there's a lot of things that stay the same, but if you watch these curves, you can make a decision, right? Is it time to extend your curve? Amazon's a master at this, right? They create their problem, they jump in it and come up with their own solution. That's that flywheel. But you have to watch it. JJ and I have been working on this stuff so many times from prior companies. When is this curve going to apex? And then do I want to see a startup come up right behind me? Look in the B2B space, it went from on-prem to cloud, from cloud to the mobile version of the enterprise. And now it's the intelligent enterprise all over the place. If you have .ai, you got a new system version of Workday. It's the same product though. And so there's so many nuances here around how to avoid the end, prematurely. And then I'll talk about a couple of failures on the other end of the stick that still hurt. But, and I still joke, I live in Bend, Oregon now. I bugged out before the pandemic from San Francisco. The world's last standing blockbuster videos in Bend, Oregon. Now that is the end of the category curve, right? So, it's predictable though, and you can do something about it. And again, I'm not going to hog the conversation here, but there's a lot of absolutely great lessons about overshooting things. My friend Samantha Goldman's on the line. I could see her in the chat. And, we overshot the moon at Castlight by about 5 years, had a great IPO, $4 billion and 28 million in revenue. Not too bad. Shot the moon, put the category so far out in front of the company and the product set, it was never going to catch it. It was never going to catch it. A lot of lessons learned here.
Well, and Dave, that's what I was talking about earlier about when the category is too far ahead, right, of the product. And I think you have to make a decision going in. You have to know how far your vision is ahead from your reality. And then you have to, and this is why the CEO becomes so important to this, because the CMO and the CPO can sit there and say, okay, this is the vision, and this is how we're going to go build to the vision, or partner to the vision, or buy to the vision. But at some point, gravity sets in, right? Gravity is, you talk about that a lot in the book, Dave. gravity sets in. Someone says, oh, there's this new quadrant. Let's go here. Oh, let's just go back to our existing market because our core market actually has more legs than we thought it did. Why are we trying to go do this new thing? Everybody thinks of us as this. Like this is when you have to be able to have a very real understanding of where you're at when it's time for your second act and when you need to have that conversation and your CEO needs to step in as the lead category creator to help make that decision. Because that's the biggest thing I see is when the category is so far ahead of the product that you have this amazing message. And a lot of times IPOs are the time. You tell this story and you get everybody all excited. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, wait, when are our products coming that are actually going to deliver on it? And then it's like just easier to go back to where you started, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's really, it's tricky. And so I think the lesson learned here is it's care and feeding. You can't, it is not a set it and let it go.
A lot of questions around CEO management, which should probably be its own multi-day offsite. But, you know, how do you talked about them being critical. How do you get them ready? How do you coach them up? How do you convince them if they're scared?
Dave, you do this all day long. I'd love to hear your feedback.
I know. If any of you figure this out, let me know. Okay. I think Janice hit it. There's an intellectual discussion about category design. I don't think anybody looks at it and says that's preposterous. You know, like I don't think they see the evidence as not being true. They might just feel like that's not for me. There's a lot of evidence about product-led companies being extremely successful without actively taking control of their category. So the evidence is there for everybody to have the intellectual debate. And then one day, and I don't know why, everybody who ever walked through a Play Bigger door had this existential discussion in their head. Am I going to run out of runway? Which is not where you want to be when you start category design. You want to be way ahead of it. Or is there an opportunity that I'm missing that's right in front of me? But it goes back to what kind of dialogue do you want to have with your CEO? Right? Do you want to talk about the Gartner briefings? And I've been picking on Gartner a lot. I think Janice got me going. And she was going to throw Gartner. She threw Gartner in the bus like 10 times in her prep session. So she got that stuck in her head. I don't actually hate Gartner, but they hate me. But what kind of dialogue do you want to have with your CEO? You know, and in what container do you get to walk up and start talking about these long-term moves and how to position the company to solve a different type of problem with a completely different container or category, right? And that's a lot different. That's a lot different than talking about your leads and your project plans and the website and the brand and the comms and the social and all the other things that we have to run as CMOs. It's hard enough as it is, but when you can bring this, yeah.
Tell me about that category container.
Well. So the success I've seen sitting in the CMO seat, having a strategic discussion with the CEO, throw the VCs in there too, if you want to, the board members that you sit and talk to. If you start to open a dialogue about, you know, I don't think we're getting paid for the problem we solve. How do you feel about that? Do you think we're fully maximized? We've hit the full capacity of value for the problems we solve for our customers? Yes, we do. Okay, we're fully paid. Okay, never mind. Let me get back to my team and such. But oh no, you don't. Another dialogue. You know, it's interesting. Every time we hit the number and we report on the quarterly earnings, the stock price doesn't change. Why? Because we're farming the category. We're not growing it. Mm-hmm. Investors invest in growth and new potential. They're trying to clamor to get in first so they can ride the curve, right? And the dialogue around this, you know, what problem do we solve? Is it aligned with the value that we're delivering? You know, what's that next act? You know, from the scale standpoint, is that just hiring more salespeople? Is that a strategy? I don't think so. You know, I mean, a lot of companies think it is. And so you can start to change the dialogue with the CEO And a change in language creates a change in thinking.
Mhm.
And then one day, maybe slide the book up or slide your book up or do something where you say, you know what, I'd love to have an open dialogue about this, but I'm not going to march up the hill with a category on my back as a CMO because it will roll right back down on me. And 18 months from now, it will be the reason you fire me. So why don't we have a dialogue together and see if we want to bring something that's ours by right to control into the fray, into the executive team. And the worst they can say is, no thanks.
You know,
Right?
Dave, yeah, it's interesting. I totally agree with everything that you said. If I had to replay the conversations I've been having in the last 5 or 6 months, you know, it starts with run the business types of conversations and manage the board conversations and get to our next round conversations. So when you start talking about what are our win rates, what are our churn rates, how do we get to our next round of funding? You know, what are the competitive pressures? You take the CEO down that path. You don't have to say, let's have a category conversation, right? It's not a category conversation. It's a business conversation about how you grow the business. And then it turns into, well, do we really have product market fit? Because if we did, we wouldn't be worried about growth or churn or NPS, right? We wouldn't be worried about trying to get the next round. I think that's naturally how the category conversation comes up. And then it's like, ultimately, it turns into, are we in the right market? Do we have the right product? That's what the category is about.
I cannot stress enough the importance of the board. And yes, you need to have you have to have the right relationship with your CEO, and you need to, and sometimes it takes more education than others. I mean, I've worked for CEOs that are very open to it, but just don't know it and want to be a student of it. I worked for CEOs who didn't believe in it. I've worked for everything in between probably. And I will say that the biggest lever you have when you get stuck somewhere is leverage your board, because you have, you know, look, obviously public company and private company boards probably look a little bit different, but for the most part, you probably have a VC on your board, a couple of them. One of them might be financial in nature. One of them is probably product in nature. And so what I did is I looked for that product go-to-market VC that inherently understood category design. I did it at Tenable. I'm doing it now. And you get them on your side. Because what CEO doesn't want to go into a board meeting and have their CMO knock the freaking socks off the board and have the board say, this is transformational, and this is going to be the next SAP, and this is going to be the next CRM. And then your CEO might say, that was before my time because I was in junior high, right? Like that's what you want, right? So when you talk about CEO management, it's a team sport. So don't think it's just about the CEO, because your board is very impactful on that one too.
So one of the things, one of the concepts in category design in your book, Dave, and I know Jennifer and Janice, you talk about it too, is a point of view. So maybe just share with folks like how to think about that. And then the point of view versus what you call the category. Some questions there.
Yeah, I'll jump in quick because I think Jennifer and Janice can give some great insights here too. And, you know, Latney, we talked about this in the CMO coffee talk a lot. Like if you didn't remember anything, at least from certainly that came out of my mouth today, the two things that any CMO could do to bring an absolute differentiator into their business that doesn't require a stitch of code is to be a problem marketer and lead with the problem. If you see speeds and feeds on your homepage, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, you know, we got Lynn from Cohesive, mass data fragmentation is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about experience gaps. We're talking about giant problems that have absolutely unsolved answers from a solution standpoint. Solve the problem, lead with the problem, and then deliver in a point of view. The first session with Patty, I didn't know Patty was going to be on today. That was amazing, right? And people are addicted to stories. It hits the heart. People act weird when you hit their heart. They act irrationally. They do really crazy and different things. You don't have to prove a concept, any problem that comes from the heart. And the container for the problem is the point of view. Frame the problem. ramifications for the problem, vision for the future, and what to do now. These are nothing. This Play Bigger didn't invent this. It used to be a debate protocol. Every late night infomercial uses the same framework. You can put that in front of your company. And last thing I'll say before I stop ranting, when we work with early stage companies, the number one feedback we get is nobody can tell how big they are or how small they are because they lead with the problem. They build a problem brand. And it's unfair. You can have 5 million in revenue with a Series A level product and advertise $1 billion problem. And nobody can see through it. And I'm not saying smoke and mirrors, you got to get the balance right. But point of view is something you don't even have to do category design, and you should have a point of view built into everything that you do, right? That leads with the problem. And then, by the way, last thing, I promise, if you can create an exercise with your teams and your CEOs to discuss the problem and then drop it into a point of view and shove it into the front 4 slides of the sales deck, and you have some success, that's a good way to get category discussions on the table, because it will expose everybody got excited about this product category and problem until they heard about the product and it was underwhelming.
Yep.
That's when you can open up, well, maybe we're in the wrong category. So if you grab problem point of view, shove it into the sales deck, drive it through the business, you're going to find out if you're in the right category or not.
Can you go through that one more time? You said it kind of fast.
Yeah, sorry, I get excited. So define the problem. What problem do we solve? Deliver that in a point of view. The 4 frameworks, just rip it right out of the book. Just grab it. It's frame the problem, ramifications for the problem, vision for the future, what to do now. Drive it into the sales deck. And then the moment's going to happen where, man, I had the full attention of this prospect until I got to our product. And they're like, that tells you something.
This is where the sales leader comes in, right? Because we talk a lot about alignment with product. Now, this is where the sales leader becomes your best friend, because they don't want to go talk about speeds and feeds. They want to go talk about a giant freaking problem, right? And you look at these moments in time, and there's not always going to be a moment like, hopefully not like COVID again, right? But I come from cybersecurity. The moment in 2013 when everybody got breached, remember Target and everyone and their mother was getting breached? Those moments don't always come around, and I don't want to say this in a negative way, but capitalize on those moments. Those are the big problem moments that all of a sudden, when you see a board member asking a question about a problem that you can actually have an answer to, that's a really good sign that you have a point of view that's really big. And by the way, your salesperson is never going to say, oh, I want to go talk about the product more. They want to go talk about the business problem. And then you get the product guy or girl in there, and you get the product roadmap aligned, and then everyone's moving, and you go to the board meeting and they say you're going to be SAP, and your CEO says, that's awesome. I was having a lunchbox, but that's okay. I had a lunchbox. I'm joking. I have a wonderful, wonderful CEO who is a millennial. That's why I say that with love. He is a wise beyond his years.
We all love Spencer.
We all love Spencer. Yes.
Do you think, though, as a category design, is sales the most difficult assuming your CEO's on board, it's really the alignment with product? Would you not agree?
Janice, you want to hop on that one?
Oh boy, this can go in so many directions. So let me first say that I think, in my recent experience, I've had the opposite, where it's not, oh, you're in a great category, you just have the wrong product. We had a great product, we were in the wrong category. And so the sales alignment was, like many companies, and this goes back to, Dave, one of the scenarios of when is the time right?
Right.
The company had attempted it was a bottoms up company that then wanted to go big because the board said, you have to go chase the enterprise. Product wasn't built for the enterprise. The product was built for mobile companies, which are 15 years old or younger. And enterprises are like decades old. They've been around forever, right? With a different set of needs and a different way of buying and a different consideration set. So we found ourselves trying to sell a product. It's like, the way I say it is like we were trying to sell a Tesla to someone who was looking for a wheelchair. So So we were in the wrong market, and we had a sales team that was an enterprise sales team, who wanted to go have lunches and dinners and
Oh, I see. Yeah.
golf outings and like all that crap. And it was just the wrong motion. And so the friction came when we had to decide we're in the wrong market with the wrong motion. We need to go back to our roots to the market for which the product was designed. Why did we abandon it? And so the issue with sales is like what I had to train them to do was be focused, don't spray and pray and sell to anybody who's going to talk to you, and change the mentality from customers don't choose us, we choose them. And that and that I got a lot of resistance, but just even recently, finally,
Oh, yeah.
the sellers themselves are now repeating to our sales leader, Janice was right. This is so much easier. We show up, we win. We show up in the right market, we win. We don't even have to try.
I love it. I mean, you're preach, sister. Preach. ICP, ICP.
ICP 1, ICP 2, that's it. Like
Um,
I've got them defined all the way to ICP 7 or 8, but we're not ready for them yet.
love it, love it. So one of the questions that came in is how important is what you call the category? The words you choose.
Can I start with this one?
Yeah, please.
So the words, one of my mantras is words matter. So let me just start by saying
Okay.
the words that you choose are very important. But I will tell you that when we landed on cyber exposure at Tenable, which was a wonderful category name, I wanted an extra word on the end. And I was like a dog on a bone, because I was like, it can't just be like this thing. It has to be like a process. It has to be like management or like measurement. We're measuring. Like, you can't just have this thing called cyber exposure. And the feedback was like, well, you have mobile payments. I'm like, yeah, but it's not a thing. It's a discipline. So like, this is like part of the conversation, right? Are you creating a discipline? Are you creating a technology system? Like, the words matter a lot. But I got to the point where I was looking around the room and I'm like, I could sit here and talk till I'm blue in the face and I probably could have got them to add a word on the end. But at the end of the day, was it really worth it? No, it wasn't worth it. It was more impactful to have everyone excited and going out there and talking about it in a consistent way. And so I gave up on that piece. So what I would say is the words matter a lot, because you don't want it to be like so far out that, this is kind of like the battle in the war. Sometimes you have a vision that's so far out that maybe you need to have an interim name that is a little closer to where you are today. So it's not so much of a mental leap that people can kind of go with you, but you know that you're going to maybe drop a word or change a word or do something, right? Where you're going to supersize yourself in the second act in a few years. And so I think it is important, obviously, that words matter, but don't dwell on it too much, because it could become a religious battle that you might not want to get into. But I'd love Janice and Dave's feedback on that too.
Hey, I will apologize to everybody for what the book did to all of you. It created this need to come up with these amazingly powerful category names. And ever since then, I said, the category name has a job to do, the old Clayton Christensen model. Everything has a job. And I think people give it the wrong assignment all the time. People want to bedazzle it, right? They want to drape it with beautiful things. And I'm sorry, ride sharing isn't that crazy of a name. And I think if you're asked to come up for a category, knowing everything that Uber and Lyft did, we'd call it something else, integrated, smart, AI-driven mechanical vehicles driving by themselves, something, right? And so the category just needs to make sense after you talk about the problem. And so everything is on the other side of the fence. If you get the problem right, most likely people will be spitting the category out in the conversation anyway. And so work on the problem, get that right. And then I got to tell a quick story here because it's super relevant. We were working with a very early stage company called Clear Metal. And after we heard about the problem they were solving, applying intelligence into the shipping industry, we all sat around, looked at each other, and realized we know we don't know what the category is.
Mm.
So, but I know what it's not. I know it's not AI for shipping. So why don't we create a setup category? Let's create a dialogue about, we called it predictive logistics, that allowed us to talk about the problem for 90% of the time and said, and by the way, we have a predictive logistics platform that allow you to incorporate AI and intelligence into what goes in the metal that ships all around the world. And then we said, let's talk about that and use that as our setup category until we figure out where the scalable product market fit is. And when we get there, let's come back in the room and decide what the meta business category is. And then probably 2.5 years later, we finally kind of figured out what was repeatable. And then Clear Metal took a position on the category that they're now scaling around and raising all of their VC around and all that, right? So it's okay to sort of say, you know what, I don't know if we know. But don't leave it empty. Say something, and say something that gives you some room. So when you modify it or evolve it, it
It's not
doesn't
too
look
much
like you
of a-
abandoned it.
Yeah.
You moved it forward, right? Predictive logistics to where Clear Metal landed. Nobody says, oh, you made a mistake. That was just your entry category,
Yeah.
right? Or leave your current category alone for long enough to figure out what the product market fit is or the problem category fit, and then adjust it then. But I think our book caused a lot of perceptions that said, boy, you just got to get this, perfect problem, perfect point of view, perfect blueprint, taxonomy, ecosystem, beautiful, category name, hire, Obama and Oprah Winfrey and have a lightning strike and, congratulations. That's
so
kind of what I think,
easy.
that's just not how it works. And I apologize to everybody in the room for that.
So if I could just add two things to what you just said, I think it's the way that I think about it is, who needs to know it? Who needs to understand it? It's your market. So if you're the words matter, absolutely, but the words have to make sense for your market and for your employees, because they have to believe. And so, in picking the word, it's not for the influencers. It's not for people who are not in your market. And one example I'll give you is, there's a category out there called digital customer service. We go after mobile app companies, and telling them to be digital assumes that they are not. That's the equivalent of calling this thing a smartphone for someone who doesn't know what a dumb phone is. So like throwing the word digital in there, which is what a lot of our peers have done, who are a lot older and have a very different approach, that doesn't make sense for us.
Yeah,
It
it's
doesn't
almost
make sense for
insulting.
our market.
Yeah. Well, guys, we could go all day and night. And Dave, thank you for joining our Motley crew. We're
Thanks
making
for
you an
having me.
honorary member of Empowered CMO. And Janice and JJ, thank you for sharing your experience with category design. I'm sure it'll be a topic again next year because you're never done, as we've talked about, and I'm sure we'll have more and more CMOs out there who have been able to do it.